Welcome back, Holland, Michigan. It is so good to be back up here on stage with you. It really feeds my ego to be up here. It's good. It's so good to see you all. I'm Jason Lavelle. I'm an author, I'm a photographer, and I also run a little podcast called The Raven. And The Raven is a storytelling show because I love stories. Ever since I was little, I've absolutely loved reading, and I loved creating my own stories. As much as it drove my parents crazy. And so when I started this podcast, I wanted to create something that was only for readers, so that you can get on the show and you can hear me reading you a great story by an artist that might be completely new to you. And then I have that artist come on and we really dive deep into their story, find out how it was written and why it was written, because all of these stories have a reason behind them, even though that's not always in the author's note. So it's a lot of fun. And a lot of times when I first come up here, I like to complain about the weather. I like to complain about the snow or the rain or the sunshine. What are you saying over there, Heather?
A little bit of crackling.
A little bit of crackling?
A little bit, not too bad.
We've got a little bit of crackling here, guys. That means we are going to switch off. We're going to switch off my fancy Britney Spears mic that I was rocking there and go with the regular handheld. Can you guys hear me all right out there? Okay, wonderful. So, normally I complain about the weather, but my guest tonight comes from a place where the sun will melt glass and metal, kill your car battery, and probably kill you as you walk down the sidewalk. So I really can't complain about too much about the weather today. Instead, I will give you a little story about the weather in Las Vegas. Now, my wife and I, and she's actually standing right there, she's the lovely lady with all the very cool tattoos. My wife and I traveled out to Las Vegas a couple years ago, and we wanted to visit some friends and do some hiking because there is much more to Vegas than all gambling. There's also beautiful mountains and canyons and some of the best hiking you'll ever do. So as we get out there, we're looking online at trails.com or whatever it is, and we find this one hiking segment called the Gold Rush Canyon Trail, something like that. And it had all the good reviews, all 5-star reviews, amazing. So we're like, okay, we're going to do this. And we drive out there, we pull in the parking lot, there's a little white sign when you park that says the hike is closed from May to October due to extreme heat. And there's a little skull and crossbones. And so we kind of scoffed because we're Michiganders, all right? We know about extreme weather, right? No, we don't, okay, we don't. So it is a gorgeous and, breathtaking hike from the trailhead through waterfalls and boulders that you're scrambling over and ropes that you have to climb down, hot springs, natural hot springs that of course you can't go in because it's way too hot. And we get down to the Colorado River and we wade in and it's like a dream. And it's cold, it's Lake Michigan cold, all right, but it feels great. Now, we're super happy, but of course, all those hikers that go down must also hike back up the canyon. And that's where things went a little bit awry for me. And, I get over the waterfall, no problem. I actually grabbed the rope with one hand, and I'm swinging myself up, looking like I'm, tough. But turns out I'm not so tough. There's 5-year-olds that are running past me up this trail. And as we get finally into the blistering sunlight where the canyon walls fall away, I'm slumping against the ground in this little patch of shade thrown up by what I am assuming is a tumbleweed. And I'm dying. My wife is doing lunges and high kicks and stuff like that because she's incredible and she's not fazed by anything. But then right next to me, there's a thump as someone slides to the ground, and it is my very good friend and fellow author, Katie Salidas, sharing in my misery and coming to experience heat exhaustion with me. So I would like you to give a very big hand for my good friend, Katie Salidas. Come on up, Katie. That was a longer story than I usually do, but I liked that story. Oh, what's going on? Did you curse the microphone? Oh no, we better sit down before something happens here. We better sit down. Are you still on?
See?
Uh-oh.
Nope, it doesn't like me.
That's not good. We might need another handheld microphone over here if we've got one, Pete. Look, guys, I can just keep talking, I guess, for another 10 minutes, I guess. Let me figure out another microphone situation. We are also tonight broadcasting this on Facebook Live for the first time, which we've actually never done before. So hello, Facebook land. It's usually just audio. And here comes another microphone by the lovely Abby Stroop. Yes, Abby!
Abby to the rescue.
All right.
But mostly Pete.
Thank you, Pete. Pete is our IT guy. He is
I was so
awesome.
hoping I could be Britney Spears.
I'm
you guys
sorry.
hear me? Is it on? Yes? Hello?
It's lights on.
Lights on.
Lights on? Lights on, and we're green. We're still on standby mode here, everyone. That's all right. So, Katie,
We're going to do
You
word
can't-
of flies where if
you-
you have
you-
the mic, you're allowed to talk.
I've got the conch, all right? I've got the conch, people. So, Katie writes a variety of genres. Ooh, I got louder. Katie, are you on?
Hello.
Katie's still not on. It's another line, Pete. Well, while we're waiting for a microphone for you, can you tell us a little bit about what you write? I'm going to hand the conch over to you, so you are allowed to talk at this point.
I feel so honored. I've got the actual working microphone. So, yeah, like you said, I tend to write in a variety of genres, but they all fall into the umbrella of fantasy. So, urban fantasy, post-apocalyptic, dystopian, they all tend to fall into that fantasy element. So I feel like I'm not genre blending too much, but I do like to play with different themes. So, for instance, one of my book series is strictly vampires, and it's called kind of like Vampires 101, my Immortalis series. Then I also like to do werewolves. I have the Old Town Pack and the Little Werewolf series, and that's an adult and a young adult series, but they're all in the same world. So if you think of like the MCU, how Marvel does all of their movies, same thing. And then another one I have is a post-apocalyptic, again, paranormal fiction. So we're looking at vampires in the future after the apocalypse. Only the twist is, normally vampires are the top dog, right? Top of the food chain. They're the ones we fear. Well, what if we flipped it? Vampires are now the slaves of humanity. And instead of being the top dog, they're now used for entertainment purposes. Kind of like the gladiatorial arena back in Rome, where they would kill people and have fights just for the entertainment of the masses. Well, the same thing applies to this, because who cares if you kill a vampire? They're not human, right? So I tell that story from the vampire's perspective. So that's my dystopian fiction. And then my newest one is kind of a love letter to pop culture with a bit of that fantasy twist. So I touch on every single magical creature you can think of. Each book brings in a new one and kind of explains the magical system as you go. So lots of different stuff.
Are there centaurs?
There could be.
I like it. They were one of my favorites because they always, could fire their arrows very straight. Yeah. All right. So we have a reading for you guys tonight, and unlike other shows that we've done here, I am not just having our author read for you. We're gonna work together doing this, and I've been practicing, and I have to say this is a lot harder than it looks. So I already feel bad for the authors that I have do this. So we're gonna do a little back and forth, and I hope that you guys enjoy it. Can everyone hear me well on this mic? Wonderful. That was kind of a rocky start there.
Just looking for it. That's in the right spot. Hopefully I can do this and hold the mic.
We can
That,
do it.
like, it takes coordination.
And I'm still doing the female part, right?
No, you're the dude.
All right, I guess. Okay. Are you guys ready out here? Okay, good deal. Really? A knife? The stranger sounded amused rather than frightened by her hasty attempt to arm herself. But that didn't stop Sage from gripping her weapon tightly. She already felt stupid for letting him into the house, but he shared the same mark as she and her mother. And as someone who had been plagued by questions her whole life about the deformity, questions she'd never had any answer to, curiosity won over common sense.
there's a strange guy in my kitchen who appeared out of the shadows and demanded to be let inside my house. If I had a gun, I'd grab that.
And yet you just revealed to this stranger that you're weaponless. Not exactly the brightest bulb, are you?
Annoyed by his mocking tone, Sage clutched the knife tighter. If you're just going to insult me, then get the hell out.
You're going to make me? His eyes narrowed on her face in a taunting glare.
How dare he force his way into her home and insult her, acting as if she were just some idiot woman. She twisted the knife in her hand, one snarky comment away from sheathing it between his ribs. You want to test me?
Okay, truce. He held up his hands in surrender. Can we just relax for a moment and talk?
Go ahead, say what you need to say. She stood firm, one hand on her hip, the other keeping the knife ready.
He walked to the kitchen table and took a seat before removing his hat. Underneath the dark fedora was a mess of dirty blonde waves that fell loosely around his head. Under better circumstances, she might have thought him cute. There wasn't a woman alive who didn't secretly harbor a thing for bad boys, and he had the look for sure. But as she waited in silence for him to finish making himself at home, his level of attractiveness faded.
Anytime now, Sage tapped an impatient foot.
You might want to sit down for this. He pointed to the chair opposite him.
I'll stand, you talk.
Fine. Your markings, they've come alive recently.
English, please, she said with mounting annoyance.
The tree-shaped branding on your wrist, it's begun to change, yes?
You mean the spots? Instinctively, her eyes lowered to her birthmark. I'm having it checked out by a doctor. What of it?
A doctor won't be able to tell you anything, he scoffed.
She'd already come to that realization, but short of any other options, she still held out some hope.
That's why I'm here, Sage. Your mother just died recently, right?
Clearly, compassion wasn't his strong suit. He might not have known Miranda, but to speak so bluntly about the recently deceased added insult to the injury that she'd yet to recover from. Sage gritted her teeth, fighting back the pain that followed from the mere mention of her mother. Fine, don't answer. Sorry, that was your line.
I was wondering if you could have rolled it.
No, realize this is too
Fine,
late.
don't answer. I don't need you to hear you confirm it. Your wrist bears the mark. That's all I need to know.
How much do you know about me? Her knuckles began to turn white from the pressure of her clenched hand around the knife's handle. She felt more threatened in that moment than before. He was either a creeper or worse, and she wished she'd never allowed him inside her home.
As tense as she was, he looked equally uncomfortable, but not because she was holding a weapon in her hand. His unease appeared to have more to do with the conversation than any threats to his life. You're a terror, and so was your mother.
Not what she had expected him to say at all, though she hadn't really had any idea of what he might say. Calling her names was about as far out and left field as he could have gone. What the hell was a Terra anyway? Yeah, you're gonna have to start making some serious sense soon.
He lifted a hand and pinched the bridge of his nose, at the same time letting out a sigh that registered as pure annoyance. You're special, Sage. Part of an ancient race of people as old as time itself.
Who put you up to this? Was it Matt? She laughed nervously and looked around for her roommate to jump out and surprise her. This was exactly the kind of comic book insanity that he might come up with to cheer her up. Wait, no, keep going. Am I blessed with some kind of supernatural ability?
She may have been smiling, but he looked as if she'd insulted him. This isn't a joke.
Right, of course it isn't. Snickering under her breath, she scrunched her face in a strained attempt to look serious, at the same time losing the grip on her knife. You're being totally truthful right now. I'm sorry, keep going. Can I fly? She snorted.
Sorry, I love that line so much. Okay, good chat. I'm going to go. Have fun being murdered or converted to a darkling. He stood and picked up his hat.
He played the part so well, even the anger. Matt had probably gone through a lot of trouble to get him to do it. The least she could do was play along. Sage cleared her throat. Hold on. What is it you're trying to tell me?
Are you going to take me seriously or continue with Fantasyland bullshit? He asked.
What is Lord of the Shire for 500, Alex?
Sage fought to hide her laughter, knowing he'd leave and Matt would be disappointed that his prank had failed miserably.
I'm listening. Matt is so going to pay for this. She wondered if he'd had a hidden camera set up to catch her reaction.
He held up his wrist, showing her the same tree-like markings. They'd really gone to great lengths to put this little act together, so she did her part, making a good show of inspecting his markings and comparing them to her own. They'd gotten the tree bit pretty close, but the ring around his was much more defined. And in the trunk of his tree, there was a symbol she didn't recognize. Still, though, A for effort. He continued, "This is the sign of our people, the Terras. We're bound to the earth by the gods who made us, and pass on our gifts through our lifelines. You were born with a mark, yes?"
Yeah. She looked down at her wrist. The leaves around the tree were growing more defined each day, and in the center of what would be the trunk, a figure-8 symbol had begun to take form, though it was merely a shadow so far.
The guy continued to talk. "And since losing your mother, you've started to notice strange things, yes?"
She nodded suspiciously, wondering if she'd been wrong thinking this was a prank. She hadn't told Matt about the strange things she'd seen, only that she was worried about cancer.
"When your mother's light was extinguished, her strength passed down to the next person in her line, you."
Okay. A chill ran down her spine. The dream she'd had, she remembered her mom's presence and the bright light passing to her, but that was only a dream. Sage set the knife on the table and took a seat, the one she'd originally rejected. So, what exactly does that mean?
"Our people were created by the gods to maintain balance. Humans are but one of many creations of the gods inhabiting this earth."
Hold on. Gods? Like, are we talking big G or little g? She asked. Being raised pagan had given her an open mind on the variety of gods. Most people, however, only believed in one, so hearing someone else talk of gods in the plural piqued her interest regardless of whether she believed him.
The stranger had continued to speak while Sage lost herself in wonder. And creation was the responsibility of the big G gods, but they kind of sat back and enjoyed the show when they were done, leaving lots of little G's to screw everything up.
So, which little g created us?
Good question. The Greeks had Athena, the Romans, Minerva, in Old Norse, Jord. These are all human names for what they believed were the goddesses of the earth. Our people are quite a bit older. We came before humanity had such words.
So, does that mean that our people worship some god that we can't pronounce? Sage tried to stifle her giggling. The way he spoke about the gods sounded suspiciously like mythology from her Dragon Raiders game.
Pray to whomever you like. The gods aren't here to solve any of our problems, he shot back at her, with a cynicism that hinted at his own disbelief. We're like reality TV, interesting to watch, but forgotten just as quickly.
So the gods don't care about us? That felt wrong on so many levels. Weren't the gods supposed to be like celestial parents, disciplining their children as much as they nurtured them?
They only care when it affects them, and that is why our race was created. We were an answer to a much bigger problem. Mother Earth took abuse from all of creation. The race of Terras, us, were brought into existence to stop that abuse. We belong to Mother Earth herself. We are extensions of her great tree of life, and it is our duty to maintain the order among other creations so that none might overthrow the balance and risk damage to our world.
Rehearsed as his words sounded, Sage couldn't shake the feeling that he was speaking some truth, and that scared her more than she could say. Mundane life sucked at times, but she couldn't complain. It was at least safe. Being part of some secret society that did who knows what didn't sound appealing at all. Especially if it was the reason that her mother had died. Asset All those working trips she'd gone on through the years, how many of those had really been trade shows, and how many were her fighting to maintain the balance, or whatever it was this guy said they did? Let's say I believe you. She riveted her eyes on her mark, the tree of life, if the stranger's words were true. He wore it. Her mother wore it. Now hers was becoming more defined. Did that mean she was destined to some fate? Wouldn't my mother have told me about this?
Terras have a unique lineage. There are only so many of us awakened at a time. We are creatures of balance by nature. Your connection awakens when another of our kind lose their inner light.
Well, what about my father? She had no memory of the man. Her mother had never been one to take pictures, and the few that Sage had seen of her father were old. Even now, she couldn't recall his face. Did he have the same turquoise eyes? Had he borne the mark too? He died when I was little. Why wasn't I awakened then?
Your father might not have been of our kind, he shrugged. Your mother had the markings, and so do you. Any children you have should bear the same.
She should have said something, Sage grumbled, feeling partially betrayed. Secrets like this were too big to keep from loved ones. How could anyone prepare for a destiny that they didn't know about and then roll with it after it's been dumped in their lap? Assuming all this is true, how could my mother have hidden this from me for all these years?
It is true, he demanded with a growl of frustration. Look, we don't age like humans. She could have lived for centuries before her light was extinguished. And had you lived out a normal human life and continued the line through children of your own, they might have been awakened when the time came. Why burden you with knowledge that might not have ever affected you?
But it does, Sage started to argue, before all of what he had said registered. Wait a second. Are you telling me that since I'm awakened, I'm immortal?
He smiled slyly, a definite improvement over the gruff impatience he'd had with her so far. Catching on, are we?
You're 100% serious, aren't you? Crazy as it all seemed, part of her kind of wanted to believe him. Who wouldn't want to be part of a magical destiny? The chosen one. It was fantasy come alive. But the other half still felt that at any moment, someone was going to jump out with a camera and scream, "You got scammed."
Serious as death. Which is what you'll be if you don't listen. Being Terra isn't just a marking. It's a birthright and duty to our people. That small glimmer of personality he'd had only moments before faded right back into the abyss. Mr. Doom and Gloom and all things were deathly important returned as he spoke. Because of that, we have our own enemies.
Look, I'm listening. She cut him off before he could go full apocalyptic with his message. This sounds really superhero-y and cool with an added dash of danger. Magical destinies, special powers, it's all great, and I'm totally into that kind of thing. But even I have to admit, it sounds like a really well put together prank. And I kind of hope that my roommate's listening, because I'm not going to let him win this one.
Can't say I didn't try, the stranger whispered under his breath. I don't have time to force feed you until you believe. This is not a joke. His jaw tightened, and he gave himself a second to breathe before continuing. My job is to bring you safely to headquarters. If you want proof and answers, they'll give them to you.
I don't care what your job is. I want truth. Answers. His aggressive tone had her hackles up. How dare he come at her with this and expect her to just take him at face value? Who would? And then get all offended when she wanted proof? Hell no. That's a lot of crazy you just dumped into my lap after an already insane day.
You want answers? Then grab your shit. We're going on a little trip.
No. She snorted, having already hit her quota of stupid mistakes today. Letting him and his crazy talk into her apartment definitely ranked among the top of that list. That's not happening. Convincing as you think you are, I'm not following some strange man whose name I don't even know to some base for mythical people.
My name is Gray, and suit yourself. He slicked back his hair and put his fedora back on. I'll let my superiors know you declined and be on my way. You're not my only job tonight.
Without another word, he left Sage to ponder the utter lunacy of her day. Truth and fantasy blurred into one another until she couldn't decide what was real. So much of what he'd said made sense. An asset was a company that dealt with secrets. Could that have been why Mark had always been so eager to have her work for them?
See, I told you that we didn't need to practice that anymore. I told you we did it perfect.
We could have gone a couple more times.
So typically I'll ask you to explain what we just heard, but it's really pretty self-explanatory. Sage's mother has died, and now she's being approached by this weird, kind of creepy guy that's trying to recruit her for asset, and she still doesn't even know what asset really is, right?
Right. Initially, she was told asset stands for the anonymous security. Was it supernatural security?
We did not practice this.
It's supposed to be the Anonymous Supernatural Security and Elimination Task Force, and I forgot what the other S was, the fake S was supposed to stand for. But her mom was essentially a kind of a demonstrator for a weapons manufacturer and a specialty security division. So it's all secrets, and she kind of just took it at face value. She didn't know that the secrets were actually basically policing the supernatural world.
Now these two, they have a very special kind of dynamic. Gray and Sage, they're a lovely couple, right?
They bicker like an old married couple.
Well, and unfortunately for Sage, she's stuck with him throughout this series. So how does this cantankerous guy affect her and help her kind of grow through this series?
Well, they kind of need each other. I mean, she is very young. She's kind of a little naive, especially to the ways of the supernatural. And he's, old hat. He's been at this for a while, but he's also a troublemaker. So he needs to kind of be put in more of a responsible position to learn that responsibility. So she's teaching him responsibility while he's teaching her the ways of being a Terra and being part of the organization.
It was mentioned really briefly in here that, well, maybe not so briefly, that she was thinking this was a prank that her roommate was playing on her. And we really don't get into the roommate anymore in that chapter, though. But tell me a little bit about Sage's home life right now, because she's a single woman, and she lives with Matt, right?
Yeah, she lives with Matt, who is, she likes to call him kind of like her pseudo-boyfriend. He's her guru. He's the perfect man because he's already taken, and he is just kind of as nerdy and as geeky as she is, so they can share on that level with each other. But he's also like the big brother, so if she has a problem, she can always go to him, which is good because she no longer has a mother, she no longer has a father. He's kind of the only person, the only touchstone to normal life that she has.
Well, and I'm assuming that she's going to find out fairly soon here that this magical stuff that Gray is hinting at is actually real, and she's going to start encountering some of these magical creatures, right?
Actually, she does a little bit before that. And it's more in the as the veil is lifting, she starts seeing the crazy happen. So in the synopsis, I say her boss goes full troll, warts and all. Well, that actually happens. She's always called her boss a troll. And as she goes back to work after her bereavement leave, she sees her boss literally turn into a troll in front of her and completely freaks out about it. Now, in the magical world, everyone recognizes the mark. So all the Terras have a tree-shaped birthmark right on their wrist. So her boss recognizes that this is there. And because she sees that, she immediately kind of backs away and lets Sage go on her own way. But now Sage is freaking out because her boss literally went troll on her, and she doesn't know what to do. She's not sure how to process this. And this happens right before she's now accosted by a vampire and then meets Mr. Doom and Gloom and all things are post-apocalyptic Gray.
Well, and I'm convinced that most of our bosses are actually trolls. I think that's a truth right there. Well, tell me about some of the other magical creatures in the series.
Like I said, it's kind of a love letter in this series because we touch on a lot of them. So we have trolls, we have ogres, we have vampires, and I think that's actually book 1. Book 2, I start to go into a little bit more of the shifter creatures. So we've got the shifter wolves, the shifter lions. We talk about Geminis. We talk about, let me think of all the ones we got in here. The Kitsune, which is actually my youngest daughter's favorite. The fox with multiple tails, and that can take on different forms. So we've got that. We've got a shadow runner who lives within the shadows and has a death touch, which is a fun one. Which the Terras, just so you know, are magic neutral creatures. Meaning magic cannot harm them, magic cannot trick them, but magic can also not help them. So they can see through the veil. So if somebody's using magic to make themselves look human, they can see that. If somebody tries to, let's say the Shadowrunner wants to use her death touch on her, wouldn't do anything at all. She can't be hurt by it at all, which is why the Terras are the magical police force, because they can't be harmed by it. So they're the ones who are able to withstand the magic in order to bring people in if they're committing magical crimes. Beyond that, I have pixies, which are fun creatures. I'm trying to think of all the ones. I've got dragons. I mean, every creature that I can touch on, I try and incorporate them in, because I want to use the magical world at large and bring each one into the series so that everybody gets to read about their favorite kind of creature, because we all have a favorite.
Yeah, I do. I like centaurs, or at least I like the Piers Anthony centaurs back then, because they were always these noble creatures that were amazing with the bow and arrow, and they were cool armor creatures. But that's exciting. I did love those things.
I will take your request as I write the next book. And I do. I have a Facebook group that is my private reader group, and I ask all the time, what do you want to see? And I take those suggestions and I try and incorporate them as I write, because I want to make my readers happy. That's my goal. If I'm not writing stuff you want to read, I'm not doing my job. So I always reach out to my readers and go, what do you want to see next? What would be a cool creature to bring into this series? And if I can incorporate them, I will.
Well, and this is a fantasy, but it's a little bit different kind of fantasy. There's a ton of action in this, and it also kind of it takes place in the real world. I mean, not our world, hopefully. Gosh, I hope this stuff isn't happening. But so how do you classify this book? What do you call it?
It's hard because it does touch on different areas. So it could be considered a paranormal thriller. It could be considered magical realism. I wouldn't say it's paranormal romance, although there is a little bit of the romantic element there. It's definitely not a main point of the story. I would say cozy mystery too, but it's less of the standard mystery, and it has a lot more of the paranormal elements. So it's hard. It's hard to classify it. Paranormal thriller.
Well, and I was struggling with how to introduce it even, because I was like, yeah, it has so many cool things going on with it, but and it's also really funny. It's also a bit of a comedy throughout all of it. Although it is a very snarky comedy. Yes, tell us a little bit about the snark factor. Really ratchet it up here, didn't you?
Okay, I love bickering characters. I love quick-witted banter between characters. And so I definitely threw a lot in there. And it's not just between Sage and Gray, although they definitely have their banter. Zach, who is another fan favorite, he likes to use references from Princess Bride to kind of disarm Sage a little bit and to kind of bring her down a little when she's stressing out or she's in that super distrustful mode, because he's trying to get her on his side. And so he throws in a lot of these pop culture references, specifically Princess Bride, and she gets it. Gray never gets them, and so he usually sits in the corner and, what are you guys saying?
Of course he doesn't.
But they all have their own language. Each character and each interaction between them has its own unique language, and they talk to each other on their level, which is how we do it. We talk to our friends differently than we talk to our family, and I wanted to make that feel as real as possible within the interactions.
I definitely think you nailed it there, and she stays true to herself throughout the whole thing. I mean, she's just as quick-witted and snarky at the end as she is on page one.
It's easy to be quick-witted when you can edit your stuff. Because if you're ever in a fight, and like 5 minutes later, you're like, oh, I wish I had said that. Yeah, see, when you're editing, you're like, I can put that in.
Yeah, well, you run into an angry customer at work, and then later on that night, you're like, oh man, I wish that this is what I could have said. But we know we can't say that. Now, you've got a variety of books, and they're not all in the same genre, but to me, they all do have that vein of fantasy that runs through them. Whether it's your romance novels, or the Pretty Little Werewolf, or your Chronicles of the Uprising, or Agents of Acid. Tell me a little bit about you and fantasy in this this love affair with fantasy that you have.
Well, fantasy is all about escapism. It's about leaving the normal world behind and all of its troubles and going into a different world with a bunch of different troubles, but being able to solve those. And that's the fun part of being an author, is you can solve those problems. And it's cathartic in a way, because you've got a lot of problems in life that you can't fix. So when you go into that fantasy world and you can fix those problems for those characters, you feel better. And fantasy, it has that element of things you wish were in reality, creatures you wish were real. I mean, come on, that'd be fun to have, shifters, pixies. I mean, I would love to see those in real life.
The pixies did seem pretty cool.
Yeah.
I like the pixies. But there's also vampires, and they did not seem very cool at all. I do not want those around.
You don't like Zach? Zach's awesome.
I don't know all about all that. He's a bad guy, man.
He's got gray morals. Let's just say it that way. Because the magical community has its own set of rules, and it's not necessarily the human laws that they follow.
That's true. And that was very. We didn't read that part. I can't get so deep into that, but that was interesting. That within these different magical groups, they really do have their own set of ethics or morals, and I thought that was neat. And when Gray is bringing Sage to visit the vampire coven, is that you've got to be respectful of what they're doing because this is their world. And you don't have to like it. It's what they do.
Yeah, and it was a shock for Sage to see it happen, because she, kind of has the eyes glossed over, the rose-colored glasses about what things are, and she had reality, right there in front of her in all its gruesomeness. But that's okay for them. That's their world. As long as they follow magical law and humans aren't aware of it, whatever happens, happens. Kind of like Vegas. Whatever happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Well, whatever happens in the vampire coven stays in the vampire coven.
Now, do you know where the phrase rose-colored glasses comes from?
I don't.
No?
No.
It's a good one. It's a really good one. A lot of people say it, and they understand what it means, but they don't know where it comes from. Chickens. Chickens, if you keep chickens, and they see blood on another chicken because one of them is injured, they will all go kind of crazy and attack that chicken and kill it. And so they have these little rose-colored glasses that they put on the chickens so that they can't see blood. Interesting, huh?
I need to see that.
That could be just my veterinarian telling me things to mess with me, but I like that story.
I need to see this. We're going to be Googling
right?
chickens with rose-colored glasses later.
So Sage goes through a lot in this book. Of course, she's a young lady, and her mother has just passed away. She lives on her own with Matt, but she's experiencing a lot more than most of us experience at an already pivotal age. Tell me a little bit about the growth that she experiences throughout this series.
It happens quickly and yet slow at the same time, because she's got a huge learning curve initially thrown at her. And while she does tend to pick that up okay, and she accepts that, she's still very quick to judge things and very quick to do things, which can cause problems. So she's kind of the maker of her own troubles through the first book and even into the second book. And when I write series and I want to follow a main character, I want a natural progression of learning. I don't like to see characters that instantly become superheroes, because that's not how it happens. It's a lot of trial, a lot of error, and learning from those mistakes. And sometimes the mistakes can be really interesting. So I focus on that as she makes a mistake and learns the lesson from that mistake, but then later applies what she learns to the next problem that comes up.
Very good. That's a much better answer than I have for my characters. I'm like, well, he learned that it's bad to kill people. So we're talking about a lot of pop culture references, and you're talking about The Princess Bride, which is fabulous, one of my favorite
Best
movies.
movie ever.
It is just amazing. But there are a lot more than that. What are some of Sage's favorite pop culture?
Oh, she's a huge Doctor Who fan, and so is her roommate, and they actually argue over which is the best Doctor.
It's the 11th Doctor.
10.
Just so that you know.
10.
It's the 11th Doctor.
10.
Abby, what do you think? 10 or 11?
I'm pleading the fifth.
Oh, no, she just held up 11. So there you go. It's been seconded.
I don't know if I can talk to you anymore.
We'll talk later.
But that's exactly what Sage and Matt do. They argue over this. But he also uses it to help calm her down, too. Because when she initially shows up and her mark starts to change, because all her life it's kind of just been a blob. And once her mother died, it starts forming the tree. And she's freaking out. Her skin is changing right in front of her very eyes. And she's freaking out. Her roommate, who, again, he's that brother figure. He's her touchstone to normal life. He's like, come sit down. The doctor will see you now. And he puts on her favorite doctor, lets her win the argument over which is the better doctor, like the good brother would do, and helps calm her down.
Now, which is her favorite? Is she 11 or is Matt 11?
Matt's 11, she's 10.
Okay, so Matt is clearly right. Every time. So no, I really enjoyed this series. It's a ton of fun, and I love your other series. But tell us a little bit how this differs from your other books, because you don't just write in pop culture.
Yeah, like this one, like I said, was my love letter to pop culture. When I finish a series, I kind of try and change gears a little bit. So I wrote the Little Werewolf series, the Old Town Pack series, and the Immortalis series. Those are all connected books. I needed something kind of like a palate cleanser, something different. And I always start off with asking, what if? What hasn't been done? The Chronicles of the Uprising, which is your favorite, I think, that came from me sitting down with my husband saying, what hasn't been done in vampires? Because vampires are a cyclical thing. They come into fashion, then they go out of fashion. So what hasn't been done with them? And making them the underdog was one of the biggest themes that I kept running into. So I used that as my touchstone to start that series. This one came from just wondering what it would be like to just be thrust into the magical world, completely unaware of what's going on. And you ask the what-if questions. And as I answered those questions, Sage became a real character to me. And her story is still continuing. I've got 3 books published so far. The 4th book goes into editing in October. And then I've got 2 more planned in that series right now. So it's going to keep going as Sage learns a lot more, because there is a lot to the magical world, and I'm having a lot of fun playing in her world right now.
Yes, I really miss the Chronicles of the Uprising. So she touched on this briefly, but Chronicles of the Uprising is, the vampires are slaves and they're forced to fight in the gladiatorial arena, but they're amazing. These are the best fights ever. It is so much fun. And of course it's wrong that they're doing that to them, but I really enjoyed all the fight scenes, so I'm hoping that someday you will return to that.
And I might. And speaking of the fight scenes, I brought my swords down to play with while I was here visiting Jason.
She was detained at the airport for many hours.
I enjoy blocking out fight scenes by actually taking weapons and sparring with somebody. And it's fun because you can actually feel the weight of the weapon in your arm. You can feel how it is to swing it, how it feels to move around with it, where your sense of balance is, where you're going to strike things. And when you get to play like that, it makes the scene more fun, again, as the author to write, but it also makes it more real for the reader when they read it. And in about 2 weeks, I'm going to be participating in Combat Con in Vegas, which is all about sword fighting, sword play. They have HEMA tournaments, which is historical medieval martial arts, all about sword play. And it's one of my favorite events because you get to learn a little bit more how to do this and how to play with these weapons. And it's just fun.
That sounds fantastic. Vegas has all the coolest stuff. It really do. Well, is there anything else that you'd like people who maybe haven't read this book? What do you think you want them to take away from it? Or for people who have read it, what are you hoping to take away from it?
The underlying theme in most of my books, and even if they're written in different genres, is don't take anything at face value. Nothing is ever what it seems to be. So the bad guy that you think is the bad guy may not be the bad guy. Vampires, just because they're perceived as evil, may not actually be evil. So don't ever take anything at face value. Go on the journey and see what's happening really to the characters.
I love it. That's fantastic. Well, Katie, thank you so much for coming up here and giving your talk tonight. Can we give a big hand for Katie Salidas? For those of you in Facebook land, this is going to be the end of our live video because we're going to do a little Q&A, and I don't have any way of filming everybody doing the Q&A. So goodbye, Facebook. It was good to see you.